discussion on Braucherei and Hexerei in the Urglaawe context. A whole mouthful of Pennsylvania Dutch words for people who may not know what they mean. Braucherei literally means the customs, the needed customs, or the use of the customs, and Hexerei means literally witchcraft, or the use of the witches, the witch element. And Urglaawe is the name of the heathen tradition that the pursuit of heathenry through the lens of the living Pennsylvania Dutch culture. So what happened is that the origins, the healing and magical practices of Braucherei and Hexerei were driven underground after the conversion of the Germans in Europe long ago. But they lived on bubbling beneath the surface, and depending on where you were, you had more or less challenge to your life if you were a practitioner of these things, up until the fall of the Roman Empire. And they started getting Protestantism, which in some places made it even worse, and other places made it even better. So I'm going to try to take you through a short tour of some of this stuff. I'm a very verbose person, in case you haven't noticed, so my slides are also verbose and maybe hard to read in the printout. I apologize for that, but I will also be making the printouts, the whole PowerPoint available on our website, so people can download it later on, and we have other ways to get hold of me if you have any additional questions. All right, so this was actually written more for you guys to be able to read it on your own leisure, but unfortunately, as you can see, it didn't come out so on the printout. But I am going to go over this quickly because this does describe it better. The heirloom healing Deutsch, or Pennsylvania German, practice of Braucherei, also called powwow in English, and the related magical practice of Hexerei serve as tremendous folk resources for us in Urglaawe. Up until the beginning of the 20th century, Brauchers were the principal doctors for the Pennsylvania Dutch people out in the countryside. And by the way, I should mention that that countryside includes this region. Some of my interviews, two of them, were from right around here. And so that we have a lot of local lore that gets coughed up from Western Maryland. Braucherei is pre-Christian or heathen at its core, with overlays of Gnostic, Judeo-Christian, and Lenape traditions. The Lenape providing mostly herbal information that I believe that we have that they no longer have themselves, which is unfortunate. But when I was in Oklahoma last time, we actually opened up a dialogue between amongst ourselves to try to restore that for that. The practitioner communities also retained a large volume of oral lore in the form of myths, superstitions, which oftentimes you have to kind of view them in a mirror, because what was designated as evil or something by the Christian churches, oftentimes if you look at that in reverse, you actually see that it's something that we embrace, and you can find all sorts of really good tidbits among those sorts of things. Charms, and they really provided a lot of information. So the Urglaawe religion arises from mostly the Pennsylvania culture as it lives today, including Braucherei and Hexerei and all the religious lore that we have from that. So the ancient origins, if you all know the Mercerberg incantations, I'm not going to try to say it in the old High German, but the Mercerberg charms are very much like current Braucherei incantations. They tend to refer to people and something that they did, and then choosing some sort of sympathy or intention in order to be able to change the situation in the physical world. Not that uncommon for any magical practice. We're just lucky we have the first two. The second one, I think, is actually the more interesting from my point of view. Because here we start seeing the names of old Germanic deities. And Full and Budon were riding in the woods, and the foot of Balder's foal was spring. So Sinthgun, Suna's sister, conjured it, and Freya, Folda's sister, conjured it, and Wodan conjured it as well he could. Like bone spring, so blood spring, so joint spring, bone to bone, blood to blood, joints to joints, so they may be mended. And the way that we would be doing that in Braucherei is you'd be doing it over the injured area and trying to assert your intention into it. But this is, for many of you who come from traditions, especially like Roman traditions or Hellenic traditions, where you have a whole body of lore and stories and myths and everything, it's a very different animal from those of us who are trying to pull things out with very few physical written resources. but we're very fortunate we have a whole lot of oral resources, but this is one of the written resources that we value, and it is very much like a Braucherei little incantation that you would say now, including referring to, to the deities. The reference to full air is particularly difficult because people try to figure out who they mean there. And there really is no clear answer. A lot of people try to say that full is older, but it doesn't make sense that you call the same guy by two different names inside the same line. What I personally think, and there are some people who support it, is that Fol and Fola are actually divine siblings, which we actually have reference for in Pennsylvania Dutch culture, both meaning the god and goddess of abundance, essentially an Asir or an Asir tribal divine pair, kind of like similar to Fran Freya on the Vonic side. And yes, I stole from Wikipedia. Now, the post-conversion, I think we all pretty much know what happened after the conversion, but old ways die really hard. And if you ever want to really strain your brain with a really good piece of information, try reading Russell's book, The Germanization of Medieval Christianity, where it goes into detail about what happened when the Christian movement started coming into the German lands and how it had to adjust in order to be able to be accepted by the Germanic people. And it's a tremendous book. It's very scholarly written, so there were some words, and I have a pretty good vocabulary. There were some words that I had to hit the dictionary on. The one I actually want to really have the most attention paid to, though, is the Gnostic. Judeo-Christians like that was actually pretty easy to identify as we were going through and pulling the stuff out that was not relevant to the heathen mindset. The Gnostic is not quite as much. Because the Gnostics themselves managed to hold on to a lot of straddling of two different mindsets, and which is kind of cool. But we would start getting the conflation of deities. Among them, the worst, I would have to say, not the worst, but the highest rated conflation was the goddess Freyja, as she's known also in Pennsylvania Dutch, Holla with Gnostic Sophie. And that one it's hard to pull out very often. Both of these old Germanic deities have always been associated with wisdom, and so is Sophia. So, and I'm okay with a little bit of conflation as long as figuring out as much as we can. So I can't say for sure that we ever fully pulled all the conflation out, but depending on where the people were in Pennsylvania, there was like almost no conflation. I'm sorry.
What parts of Europe did the Dutch population come from?
The primary regions is the Rhineland-Palatinate. And when they first settled here, they were being called Palatines. But there was the 30 Years' War preceded the migration. And the 30 Years' War caused a massive migration of populations within the German lands. And there was also a wide migration from Switzerland. Several of us in this room are products of the migration from Switzerland. And almost all Amish come from Switzerland, at least originally. And so it's a pretty wide swath of southwestern, southern, and Swiss migration, with some spillover from other areas as well.
Areas that our knowledge of even the pre-Christian religion of are pretty slim.
But there's tomorrow at the Eternal Hunter ceremony. At that ceremony, we're going to be reading the story of the Eternal Hunter, and I'm going to be including the comments that were made by a German historian about the pockets along the Rhine that managed to keep this stuff going. But Switzerland was pretty remote. There was some pretty awful things going on in Switzerland during the 30 Years' War. But having been to my family's homeland in Switzerland, I couldn't even get there with a car. I mean, it was my car. I literally got stuck on the out there. And they were pretty isolated, and isolation does help, unless you get a crazy person or like a really fanatical zealot as your local, I don't know the church term, the local vicar or whatever, and then you can end up with a lot of persecution going on. Plus the Reformed Church and the Lutheran Church were not getting along. But anyway, the Hexerei part here it's probably what really, it really made, the conflation was far less among people who identified as hexerei practitioners. Now, here's the part that's going to be the hardest for me to define for everybody. The difference between Braucherei and Hexerei, okay? In short, if this is Braucherei, this is Hexerei. It's the same point. But it is different depending on where you are also. Because Dutch, like English, has dialects and variants. In the area in which I come, my family comes from in Pennsylvania, there is a distinction in the mindset of the people between Braucherei and Hexerei. Braucherei meaning this, what's of God, or community-oriented. Hexerei is not of God and is evil or whatever. Other parts of Pennsylvania, they don't have one word or the other, and so they don't have the same breakdown of it. In some places they call everything Braucherei, in other places they call everything Hexerei, and in some places they just don't make a distinguishing factor. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a bit. Superstitions, we are a very superstitious people. I mean, even many of the Christian people I know are very superstitious, even though they would not own up to it, and it's prompted. But so this ties right back into what I was saying a minute ago. The Reformation and the 30 Years' War caused a massive mixing of populations, a large loss of populations, with some places losing 70% of their population, whether due to famine, migration, or just the wars being fought in their territories. But the old ways began to emerge from the pockets of the Rhine along the Alsace and from Switzerland. These are the people who were getting driven into the Rhineland and into the Palatinate before the migration began. Thus, the Pennsylvania Dutch identity started in the Palatinate, where everybody was going, or in the Netherlands when people started going up to Rotterdam to take refuge at the ports. And so you started having already this mixing of traditions across the sea. Then once they got here,
For those of us who have forgotten a lot of our history, what century was the 30 Years' War?
the 30 Years' War started in 1618 and ended in 1648. Yeah. And then the migration didn't take place. Actually, it's a good question. The migration didn't even start until the 1680s. So between that time, these people were living in economically devastated land with even the agriculture, which they were known for, was not strong enough to be able to sustain the population. So they had starvation in a very fertile way. Go figure. So, as I said, the real identity started as Palatine, but over time it became quite obvious that most people were totally from the Palatinate. There were huge populations from Alsace, which is now in France, and it's one of those disputed territories, but it's traditionally a German area. And then now, Hexerei continued underground here because the Christian mindsets even now dominate the culture. I think most people recognize that. Like the Amish and the Mennonites are what most people think. We were running empty.
I've lived in Minnesota, and I've grown up in the Midwest, so my familiarity with this culture is minimal.
Right.
Can you spell the P word you were talking about? The
Palatinate.
Palatinate. P-A-L-A-T-I-N-A-T-E.
And what's the region that was called the Palatine?
That's Rhineland-Pfalz now in Germany.
What?
It's the state of Rhineland-Pfalz in Germany. Unfortunately, I can't pronounce it German because it's just different. We call it Rhineland-Pfalz in Pennsylvania Dutch. But
Is that
it's
South Central Germany?
it's southwest. The Mainz is the largest. Well, Mainz and Frankfurt are the largest cities in that region. So, and that's why there's a Frankfurt in Philadelphia, is because that section of Philly was named after Frankfurt in Germany, where many of them came from. So Hexerei kind of went underground. Braucherei, however, began to flourish because it had the sanction, for the most part, or at least the benign neglect of the Lutheran and Reformed churches. These two churches, which have been fighting over in Europe, to the death of countless people, once they got here, they were sharing pastors and stuff because there weren't enough, so they actually were cooperating with each other. And they pretty much just recognized that there was this folkism. And you'll find the reference practice of folk religion very common among the Eastern Pennsylvania German historians, particularly Don Yoder, who's a very well-known one. And while I could never get him to utter the words heathen, pre-Christian, or anything like that, or non-Christian, he recognized that there was this distinct division between the official church that people went to on Sundays and this religion that they lived at home, which in many cases had these entities in it that nobody could quite explain. And Braucherei and Hexerei, the Brauchers were very widespread. My father's a doctor, and I still would go to my pediatrician when I was a kid. My mother would take me to the Braucher afterwards. I mean, it was one after another. Plus, my great grandmother being a Braucher didn't hurt either. Braucher is a male, Braucher is a female, by the way. And then we have Mountain Mary, who arose, otherwise known as the Marga from Berks County, and she is seen as the last or the most recent incarnation of the white-haired woman, who is one of the principal deities in Braucherei. And named ones before her are Veleda from the pre-Christian era. Let's see, Meister Eckhart is said to have been an incarnation of the white-haired woman. Hildegard from Bingen, and then also Mountain Mary. And she is the one who really began she established the guild that I'm part of back in the early 1700s. And she was well known for her interaction with the Lenape. And the Lenape, that's the tribe of Native Americans who are from that particular part of Pennsylvania. And she was living alongside, they said, with some of the medicine folk in the Obi Valley, and they were exchanging the herbal knowledge of the native plants with the European plants that had been brought in with the settlers. And every year, we've actually missed a couple, but because it's on private land, but the tradition is on the Sunday closest to her birthday, November 11th, the practitioners were all supposed to make a pilgrimage to her grave, and off to the side is where the Lenape medicine woman is said to have been buried. And so you make honor both at the same time. And it's an important thing, the relation with the Lenape, because on the whole, especially the early Dutch settlers had a very good relationship with the Lenape. Far different from most of the rest of the country. And actually, in many ways, far different anyway, because while this was going on, the first protests against slavery were being run by the Dykes in Philadelphia. So it's like came in with a very different mindset from the rest of the Europeans. Most of the rest of Europe, they were colonists. Our people were the first refugees. We came over here without the sanction of a colonial government. The English let us come here, but that was for their own benefit. We had a different mindset from the very beginning. All right. So then the diaspora started, and that was fanning out from Philadelphia and early places that were already established, especially Germantown, which is in Philly, and coming right down through this part of the woods and straight down the Appalachian Mountains. And this is what I always find funny. I know several people in here know this all too well, is that Braucherei is probably one of the most influential magical systems that nobody's ever heard of. Mm-hmm. It influenced hoodoo, and it's just very widespread, but the identity for some reason got lost in many places outside of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia, and also sections of Virginia. But we know it's there, especially because people who are discovering more and more all the time local tradition. And that's why I'm so pleased when I was driving here. And I was thinking Hunt Valley. I wasn't thinking Cockeysville until I saw it on my GPS, and I was like, wait a minute, I had these two interviews right here, one in Reisterstown and one in Cockeysville, just a few years ago with like these really, really very elderly Hexerei practitioners that were extremely important to us. And Braucherei became the folk medicine. Now, by this, when I say holistic practice, I mean it touches every single angle of your life. Everything from your mind, your body, your spirit. And It included herbalism. It included dentistry. It's actually illegal to do that now. It included a lot of aspects because it was frontier medicine. People didn't have access. Even people in Philly probably didn't really have access to much, so a lot of them keep it. So we had carpenters.
Scientific medicine didn't exist yet.
Yes. Now, here's a quote from Don Yoder. Religion has many levels. For those who believe in powwowing, which is another English term for Braucherei, I'm going to get to that in a second too. It is just as much a part of their religion as anything they hear or say or sing in church. Anthropologists have coined the term folk religion for these primitive survivals in society. Powwowing is Pennsylvania's best example of the survival power of the old religion of medieval Europe in a new world in Protestant setting. So we already see that they're recognizing there's something going on here, but they're not quite willing to step over the line. Some people have a different viewpoint. Not all Pennsylvania German pioneers were good Christian people. With such as were not, sin did abound with men, and men were given to idolatry, giving to the creature what is to be given to God only. They abused God's name by profanity and by superstitious practice. Yea, team.
That's a giveaway. That's always a giveaway when the church guys say that stuff.
We are those given to idolatry, and Urglaawe is the modern expression of the old religion. So, and hold on.
Excuse me.
Yes.
When about was Urglaawe established? Or is it established?
It is. Urglaawe is. This question is actually easy to answer because I can give you a specific date. But the thing about the date is it's misleading. It was established as an organizational structure in 2007. But it's organizing things that have no time on them, that are so old that we don't have, it's a new expression of old things. Very old things. And we'll get it. Well, we are, because now it's evolving on its own. Now it has its own life force behind it. And I'm still doing interviews. I did an interview with a woman yesterday on the way here. So, I mean, I'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, the 20th century. At one brief point, I can only find a couple references, one of which is Carl Harris' book, I can't remember what it's called offhand, but they were actually issuing licenses to people who practice Braucherei. That pretty much got slammed shut in the 1920s, but when the rise of modern medicine came. And the rise of modern medicine has given us a lot of good things. It definitely has, but it's also done some things that are...
I'm sorry, when you say they were issuing licenses?
The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
The Commonwealth.
Yeah. The rise of modern medicine sounds like a good thing, but it quickly became a tool in control. So there's something going on in the 19-teens in the international politics that relates to the relations between Germany and the United States. And meanwhile, here in Pennsylvania, you got this huge, rather unassimilated population of people who speak this language that sounds remotely like German. And, they were often used as common. And it became a matter of point to try to break the culture, or to try to at least destabilize it. And the Brauchers and Brauchers, and having studied Russian history in school and grad school, I see eerie parallels between what the Soviet Union tried to do to the shamanic cultures of Siberia to what happened to our folk during the late 19-teens. And I can't say I totally blame them. I mean, it's easy for us to look back now and say, oh, this was evil what they did to our people. But Europe was now in the middle of a huge war that was threatening to engulf us also, and it scared a lot of people. So they began this effort to try to suppress the culture. The dumb Dutch is still a phrase you often hear people say, and it refers to Mason, Pennsylvania, people backwards, stupid, illiterate. If World War I was bad, World War II made it sick. World War I was probably actually harder on the average person than World War II, but my mother still carries things in her head about her Dutch identity from World War II. And I know that she's not alone in that. But when I went to school, I was told the language is a hindrance. I was told your accent is a hindrance. So in second grade, they sit it down, and they sit there and you feel like you're in Pygmalion. The rain is bathing like bathing in the plane. They try to reduce your accent. And perfectly honest, they probably have a point. Because, you know, it's one thing if somebody has a foreign accent when they're from a foreign land. It has a different thing if they have a foreign accent from the native land. And I lament that because they were so strenuous with it that it actually affected how I speak Dutch. My accent in Dutch is not the same as it probably was when I was even younger. And I'm not alone in that one either. But I also want to harken back to the word sensationalizing. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Ray Myers Hollow up in New York.
Oh yeah, sure.
Well,
The Hex murder.
The Hex murder. And I actually don't know enough of the details off the top of my head to talk about it, but there was essentially a murder that involved somebody who thought that somebody else had cursed him. And this stuff did not happen all that often, but it came at a time when the media was now, you know, the newspaper media was going pretty well at this point. It was pretty well established, and it also played right into the hands of the people who were trying to break up the culture. And so it was sensationalized all over the place and used as an example of how to show how backward and stupid the Pennsylvania people were. And it was extremely successful. Couple that with the World War, and then add in the what they were now doing was cracking down on people practicing medicine without a license, because once they took those licenses away, then they could start to bust little old ladies for doing this, that, and the other thing, which started to drive the practice underground again. And that kind of sucked. Now the culture itself began in the 1940s, especially the 1950s, began this whole tourism revival. And this is where you'll find like the little sketches of some Amish guy painting a hex sign, which, you know, was enough to get him shunned in some spots. You know, but as ridiculous as that culture is to a degree, that the tourism aspect, it managed to get us through a pump. And it managed to keep the identity alive in the wider public conscious well enough.
So just like to agree with you, like to make a point, I grew up in Lancaster, and like because of that tourism culture, like there are parts of Braucherei that we learned in elementary school.
Yeah?
Like just in public elementary school. Like we learned paint hex signs in elementary school. Like,
Yeah, we painted hex signs in school too.
Yeah, and
By
like
eighth grade,
culture, it kind of worked.
yeah, by eighth grade, the hex signs were always acceptable.
Even in Ohio.
Even when the language wasn't, the hex signs
Yeah,
worked.
we weren't really allowed to talk Dutch at school.
Yeah, we were not allowed to at all.
Yeah.
I remember in first grade, some girl at the neighboring desk was trying to read something in English. She came across an English word she didn't know. We weren't allowed to tell her what it meant. The teacher who spoke Dutch was not allowed to tell her in Dutch what it meant. And she just had to sit there and like try to figure this word out. You know, somebody finally gave her a clue that she could go check the dictionary. But but you know, it's really it's a different world, you know, back then. But at that point, it became almost like the comical stuff. You know, people when they would take Dutch lessons in the 1980s, you know, they were learning things like stupid jokes and stuff like that. It's like, you gotta learn more than that if you want to learn a language. You can be, you know, jokes get you so far, you know. And I got some of those too. But the 20th and 21st centuries. Now, my Braucherei grandfather is Dennis Boyer. Dennis Boyer wrote a book called Once Upon a Hex, but in the process of writing that book, he had interviewed, I think he did about 80 interviews with elderly Brauchers and Brauchers. And he came up with some very interesting information that got passed down our guild. And my Braucherei mentor, the Three Sisters Center is kind of defunct now, as Douglas can tell you. But she and her husband did another 8 interviews. And since then, I've done, at last count, 123. Okay, that's since 2007. And I actually have to take that up to 124 based on the one from yesterday. And these really help us to establish where we're going in a lot of ways. What we're we're looking at it from a completely different perspective. And where we're really looking at it is this. That whole schism between Braucherei and Hexerei is totally a concoction or a manifestation of the conflicts of dualism. It's a very Christian conflict. You know, if somebody's doing something out of, for harmful intention, they're going to have to own up to that, and they're weird the same way the rest of us are. But this whole thing of this is God, this is, yeah, there's a reason that some element, that some dialects of Dutch or some various Dutch don't differentiate between the two. It's because they are the same point. What's that?
I'm sorry, I didn't know that. That's totally cool.
And they're the same point. They may go about it differently. The lineages are certainly not set up quite the same way, but they're not set up the same way in one part of Pennsylvania to the other. But once this door opened, and once we started realizing that the Hexerei people have something completely different to offer from many of the other Braucherei communities, then people started calling me. And that was by itself kind of stunning. I had this little old man call me. He was a very sweet old guy from Columbia County. And he called me and he said, I want you to come to my retirement home. There's 8 of us here who want to speak to you. and so we sat in a room they were all talking, and they said the academics, they wanted nothing to do with academics. And that they had heard of me through somebody else in another guild, and the academics were always out to, they always said always out to stigmatize us, always out to make us look stupid, always out to make us look evil. And I said, quite honestly, many of the other people in the other Braucherei guilds we don't want for the same reason. Just like many people in Braucherei guilds won't want them around because they're evil. But more Brauchers than not are not that close-minded. Most Brauchers tend to be syncretic, where they have elements of heathenry and they have elements of Christianity in their practice. And I include my Braucherei mother was not. She considered herself Christian, but she was definitely calling upon the same entities that I am. She's just not calling them deities. Actually, she was, but again. So these terms are complex. Okay, but I already covered this part about the words in Dutch. And dualism really is not a heathen mindset. And so the reconciliation within all of the people out of the shadows and gave us a whole lot of information. Like sometimes it's just like one little phrase that is a missing piece of something else. And I haven't published that many of them, but some of them have been published. But we have myths that fragment here, fragment there, fragment there. You put them all together, and they actually tell you one whole story, and it's kind of cool. So this Folklore Research Project, when I say continuing even now, as of yesterday, is still continuing. We've gotten input from a lot of areas. The primary areas have been southeastern Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania, but we've gotten stuff from Maryland. West Virginia turns up some really weird stuff. We got stuff from Virginia. I had one from New Jersey. I think I had 2 from New York. I've had a couple from Wisconsin. So we're pretty well scattered in terms of where they're coming from. But the harmonizing of the variants and myths, that takes a lot of work sometimes. The Oster myth was fun. That's for those of you who know Ostara, we have a myth of Oster, which we don't know how old it is, but it's pretty cool.
That would be the only one then.
It is. It is, but it actually involves 3 guys, there's not one. But so it reveals a vibrant underground folk religion that really wasn't in danger of being lost, and or co-opted to the point where it didn't make sense anymore. But so the underlying all this is a mindset, and even in Hexerei, I think when I began this whole process and started interviewing people who distinctly refer to themselves as Hexerei practitioners in areas where there was a difference. And I began to find their basic mindset was, we take care of our community. We take care of our community, You know, we have a responsibility to ourselves, we have a responsibility to everybody else. You know, it's just how they express that may be different. But Braucherei definitely has at its root the interdependence of the individual alongside of the community. So here are some of the common mindsets. Life's worth living. You know, you think of that would be plain everybody, but you know, when you're living for what happens beyond the grave, you know, are you really enjoying your work? And we have a lot to do in our life. We have to work and we have to be responsible with how we live our lives. But at the same token, so many of us are overly responsible to the point where we don't enjoy our lives at all. We live in a consumer society that is pretty much just taken up our entire identity. Everybody identifies themselves by their job, by their careers, and they feel guilty if they don't take their work home with them, and you know, and then next thing you know, they're not spending time with their family, and you start to see this breakdown. But then next, we are part of the world. We're not in dominion of the world, and this is one of my personal favorites because every Braucher I know, including like some of the most hardcore Christian Brauchers, have this as part of their mindset. But it is totally in the face of the way they view their actual religious structure. And it just shows that, well, again, old ways die really hard. And then we have the sacred duty. The sacred duty is not, it's not like a verbal, we actually have kind of written it out. We haven't written it out to the detail that it probably should be. Is that there's almost like a Hobbesian social contract going on here among the plants, animals, minerals, and humans. And that our survival depends on them. Their survival may or may not depend on us, but they can, if we treat them responsibly, they can become more successful also because we can help ensure that their herds go on or are strengthened or whatever. But we're kind of out of sync with that, by the way. Just, you know. But as somebody once said to me, the dice were green before green was cool. You know, as one of the probably, especially, I got to give it to the Mennonites, not so much the Amish on this one, but they continue to do sustainable farming and everything just because it's the way you do things, not because it's the cool thing to do in the day, but it's done in a very old world way. And see, next thing is balance. Everything is about balance and Braucherei, which is perfect for a leader like me. It's all balance. And then we are all part of complex cycles. And you know, as the governess of cycles, also the mother of Braucherei, definitely has a major role in that. But you start seeing like the lunar calendar, like you'll see the Christian practitioners planning by the lunar calendar. Many forms of Christianity would be quite, back in the day, would have been heresy or punishable witchcraft or whatever. And rebirth, and heaven forbid, talk about rebirth in certain churches. You know, the Mennonites aren't fond of that kind of that. Then the rejection of the consumer culture, rejection of fads. Our entire society is just based on both. Don't even get started on Black Friday, because Black Friday is almost like a day to shut yourself inside the house and pretend the world doesn't exist. And then Braucherei is a gift and should be shared responsibly as a gift. You know, you're not supposed to charge people for doing your work. You're not supposed to charge people for training them in Braucherei. It's a gift from the universe, and therefore it needs to be passed on to someone else. And then the multiverse cosmology, which is also one of my favorites, because what's that? Something's on it.
Singing bowl.
Sorry?
Singing bowl.
The multiverse cosmology kind of gets me. Because I'm mostly deaf, so I is we're not just talking heaven and hell here. Every single Braucher I know, with the possible exception of one or two, recognizes at least 3 worlds and up to 20, I believe was my last count. Usually 12 is another number, but 9 is the most popular number by far, which is consistent with other forms of Germanic cosmology, although our worlds and our views differ quite a bit. Now, here's the components of Braucherei within the Urglaawe context. This is where you start to see that it's fairly holistic. You got the energetic healing, which is similar to Reiki in a lot of ways. or your attention, your passing your energy on. Then we have the Blanza Heilkunst, which that's herbal medicine, and this causes problems in Pennsylvania to a degree because you can't practice medicine without a license in Pennsylvania. So if you're giving your herbal medicine out to people, you could be theoretically, so thus you give it out not as medicine, you give it out and tell people you do your research and make sure you know what you're taking. Then with Heilkunst, or sympathetic medicine, which is very big in Braucherei, is the doing something of one thing and having it take the place of something else. I think you can see that with a lot of things. If you have a sickness, you'll put a nail into something, and this is you, this is the sickness, so take this and knock the sickness out. Or the Vorsorgung is divination, which includes anything from cards to yarrow sticks to blue indigo sticks to goose bones to, it can be almost anything. I'll talk about this when we come to the rooms then. But Verwaring is protection, which is house blessings, like protection charms, obviously. I think everybody's familiar with that stuff. Heilsicht is seeing, and seeing actually also includes clairaudience, and anything that you can do. Scrying would actually go into that also. Zeitschnorr is journeying. There is no practice in Braucherei that has more verboten attached or taboos attached to sharing than Zeitschnorr, because that's travel among the realms, and that's really it can be very wild, it can be very disorienting, especially when you start going into the future and coming across people that might be but aren't, with souls that might be born into someone, and then all of a sudden they're gone because the situation's changed. I had that happen once, and I hope it never happens again. And I think that the very worst experience I ever had was with a woman who was addicted to drugs, and she had come to me to try to get some spiritual guidance on something, and she was told by something in the future going down the line that if he was born, his mother was still an addict. Please don't let me be born. Now that's a very disorienting kind of thing to come across, and it's heartbreaking. And so I actually try to avoid that. I try to avoid going into the future if I can. They don't exist yet, but the circumstances are in play. These spirits are telling you, if I'm born, there's something wrong. But it just goes to show you time's not linear. And the higher riding, which also ironically is one that the state of Pennsylvania doesn't like so much, which is essentially our massage form. And they don't let me touch it. And lest anybody thinks that this stuff, that some of this stuff is not current in terms of how this state views it, only a few years ago, there was a woman in Lebanon arrested for that, for divination. And her shop was shut down and everything like that because they said she was, manipulating somebody, which she may have been. I don't think so though. So in terms of deities, or helpful entities, as they were commonly called even by Christian Brauchers, first and foremost, has got to be holy. She is, even within Southern Germanic war, she's she's a prominent goddess. But somehow she managed to stay in the folk mindset amongst our people, and very, very, very active in Braucherei. And hence, we set an altar. I set an altar up with her. If I'm doing Braucherei, I don't have to have the altar up. But if I really had a good space in my house where I could do it, I would probably permanently have an altar set up just for that to hold. Second would be Wodan, otherwise known as his Norse name Odin, who we tend to appeal to in matters of spiritual quandaries, confusion, like trying to straighten things out. But we have plenty of stories with him in his potential alter ego of Belschnepel, like coming and questioning people and looking for wisdom. Siu, otherwise known as Tyr to the Norse, who is the Northern Star, and is actually called to in a few of our charms as the Northern Star, and we're going to bring up Caesar in a bit. And then Frigg or Friday is known as the hearth goddess primarily. And here we get the conflation with the Gnostic Sophia again. But there are actual etchings of faces in the only a few remain in the sides of hearths or kilns in Pennsylvania, in Dutch country. And people who practice that, they tend to say that's the hearth goddess, or that's the lady of the hearth, and they're referring to her in that case. Duna or Thor is he's appealed to matters of courage, matters of relationships among people very often. And then Eviger Jaeger, who we'll be honoring again tomorrow, is both a god who saved and a god of death. And it is our theory that he is called a consort. And we'll talk more about that at that event tomorrow. Berchta is far more known among people who identify as Hexerei practitioners than Braucherei practitioners. And we have a little bit of an issue with this one because Hull and Berchta in Europe are widely considered the same gods, just from two different tribal perspectives. And Grimm makes a good case for that because there's like a borderline with this side we call her this side we call her that. But in our lore, we actually have one myth where they're referred to as sisters. And that happens to be the one that involves Wolfberg is not. But and quite honestly, to me, it almost doesn't matter. It could be the two aspects of the light half of the year aspect of Paula and the dark half of the year aspect of Berchta meeting up. But Berchta's the one she isn't normally opposed to as much as she finds her way in. Like Berchta's the ass kicker. she doesn't put up with BS, and she oftentimes will bring you the messages you don't want to hear. Suna, Suna's commonly referred to is feminine in all Germanic cultures, but including the Pennsylvania Dutch. The personification of Suna is seen as feminine. But we have myths that relate her to dandelion growing and things like that. But and then Moon or Moon is obviously the moon, who again the reverse for many of you is masculine in our culture. And then we have the Weisskepiki Frau. The Weisskepiki Frau is again a white-haired woman, and she is seen to be the very personification of life force energy. And at least one of you, maybe a couple of you in this room have met Weisskepiki Frau. And when you meet her, she bowls you over. Like, I mean, the impact of the energy on your mind eye is overwhelming.
There's one condition of what?
That would be a life force energy. Okay, or to be called Megan. And it's funny because there are not that many tales throughout Germanic lore of deities being incarnated in people, but she is one of them. And they say that she's born into physical body at a time when the folk needs guidance, or the practice is about to die, or something like that to try to get it back on track. And at first, when I first was learning my Braucherei, I was wondering whether she and Paula were the same person until the two of them appeared at the same time to me, and that was surreal. Then we have less common deities. Ostra is the goddess associated with the spring equinox, but also with color, And her sisters, Helling and Nacht, Helling meaning daylight and Nacht meaning night. Caesar is an old goddess known to the Germans around the city of Augsburg. Matter of fact, she was the patroness of its former incarnation of Sitzodem. And her name literally has the same root as the tears or tears. And we actually have one little chant that makes a reference to the southern star, which you can't see from the northern hemisphere. But it is believed to be, through some dot connecting, that our folk maintain this knowledge of this consort of tear, even with the lost. Caesar's knowledge now is actually one of the more recreated one of the ones we had to really reconstruct. But she's also burst her way in the door, and there's a few people in this room whose heads are nodding right now who know that Caesar is very active in our culture now. Lul. Lul, I actually have heard Lul since I was a little kid, but I never really made the connection until relatively recently, when somebody brought it up in the Urglaawe groups on Facebook. The Lul is said to be this this helpful entity or spirit that guards seedlings, like little tiny plants that come up particularly before the last frost. And then somebody mentioned to me, "Oh, you ever heard of the German god Lulus?" I'm like, "No, I haven't heard of the German god Lulus." Well, he's supposed to be, and we found the reference, this guy who's depicted like a young boy holding his tongue. Okay, like a lollipop. They actually have that is a old term for tongue, and honored roughly about the time of year that we're looking at in before the spring equinox. You know what? I made the connection in my head. I'm like, maybe we're seeing this. It's the aspects of youth. It's a very youthful kind of understanding. That's why this entity protects the young seedling. And somebody came at me with an interesting potential reference from Slavic culture, from Baltic culture, that may actually make a connection to Frey by the same mechanism. I have to ask her again for the connection, but I did look it up at the time. I was like, yeah, you know what? They have this young god of God involving the tongue thing here, and it is possible they see that's Frey. Frey is not known to us in any other way, and I don't believe in conflating all the gods. I mean, I'll get to that in a minute too. But then we have Erda, who is the personification of the earth. The Alkes, which it's the twin brother gods, roughly akin, I'd say, to Castor and Pollux in terms of their mentality, or Hengist and Horsa from Anglo-Saxon culture. Fola and Fol appears in the Merseburg charms, but they're both, these two, we have a couple charms that actually appeal to them for abundance, particularly abundance being passed once you can in a couple of our chants. And then we have the Vort Hexa and Vort. The Vort Hexa are otherwise known as the Norns to people who know the Scandinavian lore, and they're the witches who preside over weird. But now Vort itself is concept of weird, or very, very roughly karma. Is Vort himself, is Vort a force, or is it a conscious force? Is it conscious or unconscious? Is it a maker? Is it not a maker? And quite honestly, there's no clear answer in that. But within Braucherei and Hexerei, we have both. We have people who believe that there is a conscious maker force behind the force of Vort. And which is said to be unconscious by most, I would say. But if it's conscious, then we're looking at deity. But even if it's unconscious, we're still looking at something that we can't quite explain. But even elderly Braucherans, actually specific elderly Braucherans, who just happen to know a little bit about the Scandinavian creation issues, so what is it that set the primal fire and the primal ice into motion to be able to connect with each other? So, no matter where you start out your myth, you always have to wonder, like, how did it get there? And there is no explanation for all that. And to a degree, I'm okay with that, because life is a mystery to a degree, and sometimes when you have all the answers, we're living anymore. But it's within that ambiguity, I think, that we have a lot of opportunities to think for ourselves and to try to come up with ideas and theories otherwise. Then we have any number of other entities. We have the Reifries, or the Frost Giants, some of whom we know by specific names. We have Fieries, which we don't have names for so much, although we do have one story of a fire giant who comes here disguised as a man and then bursts into flames. We have the dwarves. We have the plague horse. Who's that talking about? The plague horse riding. Oh, I was talking with you. Yeah, but the plague horse riding up the Schuylkill, along the Schuylkill River and bringing the Spanish flu to everybody. We have water nixies, water nixon, Asa nixon, water nixies, kobolds or kobolds. All these things are and sometimes the description of them doesn't match from one end of Dutch country to another. We have distinct tales about the water mixes, and how the beavers try to beat this water mix would capture spirits. She would hold them hostage, and finally the beavers got together and dammed her up inside the dam in one of the creeks up in Carver County. Plant spirits, animal spirits, and even mineral spirits out the wazoo. The Edisa or matriarchal, usually matriarchal spirits, but we actually have some tales of them being patriarchal spirits as well, because even in Scandinavian lore, it's not clear like how they become Alfar. So it's Hexerei. This is one of some people's favorite stories. I know the cryptozoological creatures that we have in Pennsylvania, Dutch country, the Hexen wolf, which can make itself invisible, or can suddenly manifest itself as a shape shifting, and like will attack people's cows at night. And I gotta tell you, when I was like 16, I think I saw one of those things. It was kind of creepy, and that list is not nowhere near exhaustive either. Some of these creatures you want, some creatures you don't. I should also throw in the Lenape's Wendigo is known in our lore also. And actually, there's another creature, the Snallygaster. Snallygaster is the Maryland term for this creature. And it's a kind of almost like, it's not quite a dragon creature, but that is pursued by the Hexen wolf, or known by another name in this region, known as the Dwyo. But people in this part of Maryland actually have some things that look like hex signs, but with a specific symbol on them that is a trap for this creature. So, and that's some of the lore from like this general area. Then the runes. Now, the runes are not widely known in dice culture, but many people theorize that the runes are at the core of some of the hex signs, particularly the simple 6-point rosette hex sign. But it is known they are known in Braucherei, they are known in Hexerei, even if the people don't know what they're doing. And then I have to go into some detail on this one. We have a very specific ritual on Groundhog Day, or during that time of the year, where you take these little scarecrows and you awaken the plant spirits in them. And then they go from being what's called a Wolfamon, or a scarecrow, in terms of the being called a Wutsamon. And Wutsamon is now positioned to be the father of this year's crops. It's a very highly old practice, and but as part of the process, you're saying a particular incantation. The incantation is actually in your head, or said just slightly above what is audible to most people, and you're drawing the symbol. I was watching this woman draw the symbol when she was teaching it to me, and I was like, "What are you drawing?" And she just said, "All I know is that I'm looking for the answer. I'm looking for the answer." And I finally had her draw it out. She couldn't draw with a pencil. She actually had to use chalk and like draw it out. And I was like, "That looks a lot like the Asu's rune," which of course means answer. And so I started discovering that we have quite a bit of runes. I found more than this is the current list using the Elder Futhark as we know it now. This is how the people were actually drawing them. All right. We have the Fehu rune being called Fee, or cattle, by more than a few people, and they were being used to deal with the element of fire for the most part. This one, which is kind of like Urus except upside down, they didn't have a name for, but they were not using it very often. But when they were using it almost like a horse, like a horse would have a horseshoe in the ground, but it's representing the force behind it, which is not that different if you know the runes. It's not that different from the Urus rune. Dorn, Thorazaz, that was calling on courage. Go figure. This one was probably the most widely used one. That's not true. But the Anvat, that's what they were using in drawing on the Wutsamon. And different regions came up with different answers from different people. right? People were putting this on their carts, like, or, you know, for anywhere they were going. I even know a Mennonite person who has this etched into her carriage. Go figure that. Fakkel, spark, or otherwise known as kenaz. Geva, which this is widely used in Braucherei for sealing. Okay, it is very similar to the Geva room. You're giving of your energy, exchange of energy. Wunsch, which that I put that there because Bunyo would go there, but the symbol's nowhere near the same as the Bunyo room.
Unless you turn it on its side.
If you turn it on its side, you knock a little bit of it out, but yeah. Hogel, meaning hail, which is another widely used one, and this is the one that even some Christian Brauchers theorize is the root of one of the most significant hex signs, which is the 6-point rosette hex sign, which has the same meanings of banishing, transforming, keeping things away. Note, which means urgency or, you know, emergent condition. And in Braucherei, we use this a lot on bruises. When people are bruised, they're drawing. Some people think it's a cross because it kind of looks like one, and some Christian Brauchers it is. But the way I was trained, it's slanted. Isaac or ice. You know, the funny thing about this one is, ice was not the first term I got for Isaac was, focusing more on the second in rather than the first, in which Isa would be carrying Isaac rather than the ice. Next was Yor, or Yara, and this one is also widely used, particularly in relation to Hall. Believe it or not, it was actually totally easy to believe. People often use this to protect things from heavy winds. Shield, which now this is usually the Elhaz room, you know, making the sound, but in this case they were all using it to represent sh, which doesn't have a runic representation as a single letter, at least not in the Elder Plutarch. Suna, that's pretty obvious, and that one was not that widely used, but it is also one that is believed to be the root of some hex sign orientations, especially sun wheels, which in Dutch culture don't carry the stigmas over from German. Spitz, Spitz meaning, well, Spitz means point, but that's not the only thing it means. But it's actually also a vulgar term in Dutch. But making the sound or relating to CU, and actually in this case, CU. I've only come across 2 people called CU, and they didn't know whether they were really why they were calling it that. Like, I can't say that they were actually attributing it to the god CU or not, but they just called it that. And here we have probably the biggest element of confusion in the whole thing, which is the conflation of Awaz and Iwaz. Okay, and part of that is caused by the fact that the word guile in Dutch means horses. Okay, which would take you to one rune, while the other rune would take you to the sound of guile, I. So Iwaz versus Awaz, and I haven't quite sorted that out yet, but there's a whole community of people in Columbia County, namely those 8 people that I've mentioned before, who are like screwing these 2 runes up to the point where I can't quite follow what they were meaning. Manas comes from Mon there, and that one I've found mostly used by Braucherei practitioners out in central Pennsylvania at birth, time of birth, putting it on the kid. Yes. Then Lagus was unnamed, okay? Totally unnamed, but that was actually used in literally keeping places from being flooded. Engel, meaning angel, but its relationship to Ingvaz was fairly clear, especially because it was found on the mills of Braucherei practitioners, the sides of granaries and places like that. Dagaz, or dog as we call it. The thing with dog is, which means day, is this was found in some odd places. It was found on the sides of looms, a couple of looms. There were other hex signs and other ones found even more than that, but another place was found, there was somebody found a rock of it down by a tombstone. Somebody else found it inside of a chest, drawn on a piece of paper, found in red thread around something, and it took me a while to find out what that was, but what that one was this rune is used in Braucherei to dissolve things. And in this case, they probably believed that the object that was bound in with it was cursed, and that they were trying to dissolve the hex that was on it. And then odem, or oder, meaning breath or artery. I've gotten two different answers on that one. Usually referring that it actually used in health in different ways. Like people who called it odem tend to use it literally for people who are having breathing problems, and people who call it odem usually using it for the people who had actual circulation issues. This by itself, this is the first time we've ever unveiled this at all. I've been doing this work on this, and it's still not even complete because the woman yesterday brought something up I still have to look into, and plus there are 3 other runes that I haven't even mentioned here because I have not been able to figure out how they're using them exactly.
I keep having little linguistic questions in my head. Does shield mean shield?
Shield means protection or shield, yes.
Yeah, all right, so that fits perfectly with the officer.
Yes. So, which, yeah, it fits absolutely perfectly, and, it's also one of the reasons that I put it on my hat. But, how we doing time?
We have about 35 minutes, 35 minutes.
Good. Everybody okay so far? Right. Now, I may have to refer back and forth to 2 slides ago. When I first started talking to people about Braucherei and Hexerei, this one popped up out of Hexerei even more again, was this relationship of elements for runes. Okay? And certain elements, there were 12 elements, although I don't think a single person knew all the elements and their runic correspondences, but a whole bunch of people knew many of them. So like essentially, I was being told that there were 12 elements, not just earth, air, wire, but instead of spirit, time, air, light, water, yeast, earth, venom, metal, salt, fire, and ice. Fire and ice being the primal ones, and then all the others are combinations thereof. Like so many parts of this, so many parts of that equals yeast. So and I'm going to refer you to a book if you're interested in it that actually filled in some of the blanks for me, even though it just happened to be more coincidental than anything. But this book, Wolf Astrosyn's book. Somebody told me, like when I was talking about this, someone was like, "Well, you gotta get a hold of this book." And I was like, "Well, okay." They said, "Oh, I know where you can get it. You buy it at Garland Letters down in Philadelphia." Went down to Garland Letters, opened the book, and again, a lot of our elements were missing, but this guy had the elements that did match were the same, and the next thing I know, I was like, you know what, I think that I'm comfortable filling this in. So there was an element of reconstruction in here because we didn't have a full picture. So I just want to be upfront about that, and let you know that we are missing some of them. But this one was definitely related to that. This one was definitely related to that one. And if you can actually see the year being related to to time makes sense. But what does that matter? Well, time in Braucherei, you actually do things with some of your practice and some of your chants where you're going in one direction to represent the forward flow of time and other things to try to reverse things. And you're using the Yera rune on people to try to remove things that are actively attacking them with time, which are kinds of age-related illnesses or injuries that happened in the past. You're trying to undo by changing the influence of time on their person. And then the same thing applies with many of the others. And believe it or not, they can all be either proactively put on or reactively put on, which means that something else is exerting and you're trying to weaken that. But people say, well, why would you proactively use venom? Like, how? Well, because sometimes if you have something in your system that needs to be ejected, you've got to kill it. And so these are not literally using venom, but you're using the energies that are associated with the venom in order to be able to try to fight it off. And I know that I'm definitely hitting people with a big fire hose by saying that most of the water is splashing away, so I'm going to try to get into a little more detail with that. Okay. All right. First off, in Braucherei, okay, you have everything's about balance, and so most of us who I'm ambidextrous. I have two clumsy left hands. I'm like, but most people have select one hand to be their application and one hand to be what they call their shoeing hand or their moving hand. And so it's a constant cycle of applying, pulling, shoeing, getting rid of the energy, all the while going through this filter in your mind, which is usually the Dagada's room that you were trying to use to clear the energies out and to make sure that you're putting your own life force back in with the assumption of the intention to go with it. And so, for instance, when a few years ago, there was that troth group, somebody asked me if I could do a little bit of Braucherei on somebody, and when I was dealing with was somebody who was having edema of the leg, quite obviously a water imbalance, and but as I was going along, I kept sensing yeast, but in this case I was sensing it reactively, so you can see I was feeling the thing on through, and so what I needed to do was where's this yeast coming from? Well, it turned out it's coming from a yeast infection, which she discovered when she got home. She didn't know that, but I told her at the time, I was like, I think I have a yeast imbalance or something going on here, but it was coming through the processing and the pulling. As I was pulling the water energies out, I kept getting this residue of this Urglaawe root on my finger, trying to shed it off. So, so she went home, and sure enough, she had a yeast infection. They actually called me and told me, "What you know, you were right about that. You were crazy. You're sort of taking the water away." But anyway, so here are some terms. You don't have to memorize these because they're all pretty much in dice. You have the application hand, or the all-bended beak. The abshaken B is the shooting hand. Brauchschwung, there's usually 3 sweeps in a Braucherei circuit. Like if you have a client, the first time you do it, and Doug can tell you, this can take a long time. The first sweep isn't so bad. It goes like, you're opening them up, you're doing the work on the head, straight down the body. It's kind of a broad sweep, that's what it means in Deutsch. Brauchschwung means the broad sweep. But by the time you get to the second and the third sweep, you're in these little tiny details. Actually, both of you know this, going across the entire body, and it literally can take 40 minutes to go from head to toe. So if you combine the 3 together, you're looking at an hour and a half, and it can get kind of tiring sometimes to the practitioner. Let's see what else is important. Really important on this page probably is the verbot. The verbot makes learning the practice difficult. I'll be honest, because we're looking at a folk tradition that's going on for who knows how many hundreds or thousands of years here, that usually developed from people living in the same community who very often, it wasn't just the women, but the men also, but the women tend to have more time inside the house while the men were in the fields, traditionally speaking, but people have been neighbors, they were there. It was supposed to be man training a woman, training a man, training a woman, training a man, training a woman, it was a lifetime thing. It was not something that you just learned on the internet and then, went home and, hey, look at me, I'm a Braucherei practitioner. It wasn't like that. You were learning your entire life, and we're trying to recreate this from a big, difficult, and Doug is my first male apprentice. I'll explain that in a minute too. But he lives in North Carolina. I live in Pennsylvania. We had a rough time really getting it to go until finally I was able to get down there. We were able to spend some time. He had learned everything he could, but now we're starting to try to figure out how do we make this lifelong interaction continue as organically as possible despite the distance. My other trainees are all in Pennsylvania. It's easier for me to actually be in touch with them. but it's still not the same as it was when I was training, where I was literally spending weekends at my mentor's house, and she was training me in things as we were going along. But even that doesn't compare at all to my great-grandmother, I've met people who were in my great-grandmother's guild who said, oh no, it was like for a decade, you would just be with each other all the time and sharing information. Once they achieved mastery, you pass the information back and forth. And it's trying to take a tradition like that and bend it into the present, where we don't have the distance, we don't have the time, when we have the ability to cross the distance in different ways, it's puzzling. I'm not quite there yet with how best to deal with it. But the forbodes are put in place to protect the practice from getting misused by people who don't know what they're doing. And most of Braucherei is fine. It's not, not dangerous or harmful or anything like that. People who have never been trained in Braucherei oftentimes know the chants anyway, because we always had what my father used to call the first aid Braucherei. The stuff that you would need to cut yourself out in the field, or you banged your shin, or but not as many people are practiced or versed in the entire practice. But some of the stuff is kind of hardcore, and the stuff, especially where you're leaving your own, you're giving your consciousness over to somebody else or something else, or when you're dealing with the souls of the dead, or when you're dealing with the damaged souls of the living. And that right there is probably actually the most dangerous one, because you're dealing with people in real lives. 100 years ago, this was the doctor. You were the doctor. And messing with people when you don't know what you're doing, herbalism is a big one with that. People are doing this all the time now. Oh, well, here, take this. Not finding out what the person's allergic to it, not finding out what the plant energies are associated with it, telling people to take essential oils internally, down, which to a degree, especially if they're diluted, but like just recently heard some crazy things about taking essential oils straight. I'm like, internal. But that's why these things were put into place. On the one hand, they make it very difficult, because there's a lot of things I would love to be able to just pass to Doug in an email and say, here, this is this. But by the same token, I know that by doing so, he's already achieved master level, so it's not a big deal. But it's being responsible for something that needs to be handled responsibly. And that's the part that I'm still trying to work out. How do we fuse the past and the present together in order to make it something that can still be shared, but while not throwing the whole baby out with the bathwater, and then the next thing you know, everybody on the planet is sharing. And it's kind of ironic you would say that I'm willing to share the main prayer here. But the main prayer that I'm sharing is the Urglaawe version. The Christian version is loaded with forbodes, okay? But the Urglaawe version isn't, because for the most part, the main prayer by itself is really not that damaging. It's the other stuff that really, it's the journey work, it's the, it's, how should I say this politely? Selective cursing. Where you target things. There's a whole way in Braucherei to curse things while blessing them, which is like, try to wrap your mind around that one. Well, I'll give you the secret here, because anybody really can figure this out on their own, is you just bless them until their weird is accomplished much more quickly than normal. In other words, hang yourself. Here's the rope, keep hanging yourself. You have the ability to stop it. It's a dangerous practice, because it spills back on you. But anyway, I figured I would take advantage of this, because okay, Doug, I'm going to be upfront about this. I'm going to be upfront about that. Doug came to me do you mind if I share this?
I don't mind at all.
Doug came to me through a matter of happenstance, actually. My Braucherei mentor, who was very good and everything, she became very busy with the children and everything. Doug went through and here I'm taking a little bit of a risk here, especially since I'm on camera. But, the Braucherei training course at the Three Sisters Center was preceded by a history course, a history and the practice of Braucherei, which had some very excellent stuff in it. But is by itself not traditional, because for the most part, I'm reasonably sure that when my great-grandmother was learning from her mentor, that she not learned the whole personal history of Hildegard von Bingen.
Yeah.
She probably learned that Hildegard von Bingen was an incarnation of the Archangel Grau, but she probably did not learn the entire, So there were like levels of detail that were not necessary. But that was how the Three Sisters Center was making it a fun to be able to sustain itself, was through charging for that course rather than through the practice of, rather than for the official training proper. But not everybody understood that. And it was made quite clear to me when I was taking the Braucherei history course that, just because you're in the history course does not mean you're automatically going to go for an apprenticeship. I did, but some people didn't quite get that message, and so people were taking the course and then not becoming apprentices, and, well, wait a minute, I paid for this course. Two are separate things. And anyway, Doug, he also understood that. That was not an issue with Doug, but the problem with Doug was that who was going to take him on as the apprentice. And most of the females didn't have time where they were Christians, and he was saying, well, I'm pagan, and so they tried to direct him to two of us who were in the guild, who were mostly oriented toward paganism. Well, anyway, only one of us could do it, that was me. And now we had the problem with two males, because in our guild, the history was always male, female, male, female, male, female. But at this point, we've had to start deciding, is this a rule that we're willing to change? And quite honestly, there's a lot of people in our guild who are still not comfortable with the changing of it per se. But on a case-by-case basis, they're all saying, well, yes, we have somebody who's ready for it, let's go for it. But then, the whole question of gender came up. There's a lot of different gender identities now. It's not quite as binary as it always had been. And can I, as a gay man, train somebody who's a straight man? Because it's not the same energy, it's not the same identity. And we actually started actually adding that consideration within our guild. And I think that's actually a positive thing. While not throwing the baby out the bathwater again.
As an interesting adjunct to what Rob's saying, in all of my various magical trainings and initiations that I've undergone throughout the years, of all the men who have taught me, there was only one of them that was not gay. All my other initiators and teachers had been males. Had been gay males, yeah.
See, there's actually an interesting thing within Hexerei regarding that whole thing, where the view of the non-binary gender pattern, they actually look at it as being a manifestation of the different elements on different people. And this is one of the things I have not quite been ready to share yet, that it's so relevant at the moment I'm going to bring it up, is that, so from their perception, there's 12 genders. One that is associated with each one of those elements, and that we all carry different aspects of it. And according to this one elderly woman, I am the gender of air, which anybody who knows me knows that that's absolutely probably the case. But the binaries would be fire and ice, and all the others would be, different manifestations and influences from there. But they never codified them into, gay, straight, cis, whatever. They didn't do that, but they just said that there's different identities, different energy statements associated with the core identity of the gender of the person. And this is one of the more fairly recent interviews, which is why I haven't focused on this up yet. But the more I think about it, the more I think, from the Hexerei perspective, it totally makes sense. It's consistent with everything else that they do. It boils everything else down in like to 12 elements, so why not that also? But anyway, so it did me to sideline me there, but should there ever be any question, well, why is it that in that group they had a male training a male, when I've always heard it's been male, female, is because sometimes the situation is put before you, and the question is put before you, and you take what your options are.
I'm gonna share with them the interesting aspect of training via a plan.
Second,
Huh?
I couldn't hear you.
You want to share with them about the interesting aspect of how you can train via a plan.
Well, plants have roots, and so and things can connect from one end of the plant to the other end of the plant, but that's for a separate discussion, because we're running out of time, I think. But we can always talk about that later, for ED, I'm happy to tell you something about that too. But, let's go for class.
You'll have your time later.
Yeah. So it's, Elder would be a good place to start, but, alright. Okay, so this is the main prayer in the Urglaawe context. Now the reason I present this is, there's a lot of people out there who want to learn this, they don't know quite where to get started. And particularly since the very first lines are under forbode, because they are exactly the same they are in every Braucherei prayer out there. And so that I can only say, and people can only repeat, I cannot write the words in Dutch, but I can write them in English, go for it. But it is said 3 times, usually over the head of the person, with your hand is starting like that and going down. But, so the first line of this prayer is, Des Vasa, Des Fire. Des Vasa, Des Fire, Des Vasa, Des Fire. And again, I will make this PowerPoint presentation available to everybody on Urglaawe.net. The second segment. I think that this is the one that I gave the most, right?
Ik ben Udi de Urglaawe voor in die Heiligscheid Nijsjestijger.
Ik bid voor de zeven de Urglaawe voor in die Heiligscheid Nijsjestijger. And then we strike in the Western night. This right here, I step into the western leaves. That is actually, you say the main prayer once, but this part you don't have to repeat, but if you do not actually begin to cross over and begin to straddle the other realms, that is a line that you'll say a lot. And when you're doing a Butsamon activation thing or some other rituals where you're stepping out, the western leaves is usually where you go. This is the western leaves of the world tree. And western leaves of the world tree are considered to be, it's kind of like the meeting grounds for spirits. It's a very odd kind of, it's kind of like you're referring to that place where you went where democracy, the importance of democracy.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that's where they all go. Kind of, it's like the UN of the world tree. But the eastern leaves is like more of a place of where like actual magical things happen. This is where you begin to invite spirits over from the world tree. Northern leaves of primal fire, southern leaves, primal leaves, southern leaves of primal fire.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, do you think there's any relationship with reference to the western leaves to the western migration of people from Europe to America?
Honestly, I don't know. I never actually even thought about that. Because the eastern leaves again is the place of magic, and the western leaves is the place of like gathering. So that's actually kind of an interesting concept. I have to go back and see if I can figure out how old that is. But as far as I know, the rest of that I've been around for a long time. But it's a pretty interesting thought. Although it would be even more interesting to find out if anybody who migrated to the east. But remember, while the Dice are migrating here, the Volga Germans were migrating to the east at the same time from the same general area. So it'd be interesting, and we've actually found some cool stuff in our communities too. It'd be interesting if they had the reversal. That'd be kind of interesting. Right. Third one. This is the one that is because in the Christian prayer they would make a reference to the red church. We call it the red hall because we're not they're quite the same. But Xol Roda Sol, Genie in the Sol, Xol Roda's book, the Reflenis book, Xol Roda Mesos, of Hevita Mesos, or you can also say Hevita Mesos, which means I bring it up, but one is past tense, one is present tense, which is why I stick with the first one. Schneidig wrote off a vent. I cut the inflammation of it. Now this is all very sympathetic, and I got this whole thing here for a reason, but our basic tools are Braucherei knives. This one was fashioned by somebody I know. The traditional ones were more like kind of long with almost like a square or rectangular end, but this one worked quite as well. And so you would actually be doing the imagery. You wouldn't actually cut the person, but you'd be like actually literally cutting it away. All the while, I have my backup book. My true Braucherei book does not leave my house. It does not leave my particular spot, but I have multiple little books that I take with me that carry the essence of it. So while I'm saying the prayers, either I'm drawing power from this, or I have this in my hand, or there's other tools I have as well. Room for sweeping out the negative energy, although that's also sacred to hold. And what I consider one of my more treasured things. This was my great grandmother, and this was her static energy thing. I can still feel the energy on it.
Closer.
That's wow.
This used to hang in her kitchen. Okay, and all she would do is imbue it with energy, and I would just sit there and just radiate the energy, and like people would come into her house, they would have no idea what it was. They would just think it's a little dish towel, but she never. I actually didn't know until I was in my teens that's what this was. And when my cousin was emptying his house out, he said, "You know, you're a practitioner." He said, "I saw your great grandmother's stuff, and you like it." And so little things like this can end up being tools of the trade, things that radiate the energy out, because you're giving your energy all the time, but the static energy things are things you can draw from when you're beginning to deplete your own resources. Because kind of like when you're on an airplane and they always tell you, you have the stewardess telling you that when the pressurized massive fall down, you're supposed to take care of yourself first, then your kids. Most parents probably actually have the inclination to take care of the kids first. The same as in Braucherei, you got to take care of yourself also in the process, because if you're giving too much of yourself, you're going to weaken out, and the next thing you know, you're going to be passing energy through that may not be fully what you intend. So you start to draw on the items around you. I also have her glasses, which will never leave my house. And quite honestly, the house burned down, those glasses probably would somehow survive because they were like right on her, right over here, just carrying everything. Fourth segment. Now this one, the Christians tend to call to the saints. So we actually go with all of them on the vice category, although we can insert, different deities in and not. I'm going to make an appeal to people. Anybody who's interested in this sort of thing, this is so closely connected to the dice culture. Silverwave has a book out called Hexcraft, and she and I get along perfectly fine. No issue with it, but I just, from my own perspective, say, this is so ingrained in the dice culture, and the only religions that really are that close to the dice culture are Christianity and Urglaawe. It's kind of hard to pull it out of the culture that it comes from. But by the same token, Silverwave is also dice, so I mean, it is. She has as much claim to it as we do, but for our context and for what we're learning on the research that I've done, I try to keep it within the Urglaawe context. So, beglikt, das gezegnet sind, Weg and sail. Instead of a northern accent, life and sail. The northern accent we say lake instead of life. This segment, thy hand and my hands or heaven in hand. These two lines are probably the most important in the prayer, because these become the thing you're rhythmically saying in your head. While you're going throughout the thing, this builds the mantra that keeps you going and puts you into the zone. Then you go below the waist, and all of a sudden you switch over to die peaceful, my feast sing life. Right? There's two ways to interpret this. The Christians look at it from the perspective of the thy in this case is God, but in our case, the thy is the client, because the Christians tend to be looking like are saying your hand and my hand, God, are the same hand. But in this case, I'm saying your hand and my hand are the same. So what I am doing, the energy I am giving, is of you now. So there's a whole mental shift in the way that it's comprehended. And I don't expect anybody to memorize any of this right now, but I just want to go through it with you once. On the last page of the presentation here, I have a listing of stuff. The one I'm going to post this to Actually, I'll post it to this one, braucherei.org. I'll probably post it to Walmart.net also. And there's other information out there also, including more chance and things like that. I've always had to be very careful with the handling of braucherei because, again, it's an heirloom, and the thing is though, it needs to come out. I mean, I'm 50 years old. I can't let it go much longer. And for a while, there was because the interviews were so overwhelming. It was just the amount of information that was coming out, and trying to organize the information was taking so long, especially once we unleashed the Hexerei community. And I think that's it for my presentation. So,
Rob also has some excellent books on the subject that are available.
One of which-
So,
Highly recommended.
Are those over at the Office Desk? Okay, you can also put them at the Office Desk if you want.
Oh, yeah?
That's all.
Oh, thank you. I don't have that many of them, but we have some of the myths that we reconstructed are there. And some of them aren't even reconstruction, some of them is actual myths from the agriculture that are pretty well known. Does anybody have any questions about anything?
Couple of questions.
Sure.
How much influence did things like the 6th and 7th books of Moses have on brauchery or hexery perhaps in the New World?
We actually had to stir that out because that was such a obvious
Just
Christian Gnostic overlay.
Yeah.
But it does for Christian practitioners. I gotta tell you, I have copies of them,
Sure.
but they just do not resonate with me at all. For me, what happened originally was I would have if the client was Christian or identified as Christian, I would try to do the work in a Christian context, but I couldn't.
Make the connection.
It's just not my guy.
And you didn't mention Long Lost Friend at all.
The Long Lost Friend is but one book of many.
Sure.
And by kind of a self-aggrandizing, person to go down, but it is probably the oldest and most famous braucherei book, but it's all within a Christian context. We do get some good stuff from there. We do get some things like some of that basic concepts that come from there, but the symbols are altered to match the symbols that are used in Hexerei for general blessing. But yeah, you get animal cures out of there. But again, you find yourself calling on
Things.
yeah, and so you end up, I don't like to just randomly change it, especially if we have another reference from somewhere else. The way I've been doing it is, for the most part, is if there is a neutral chant or incantation or plant reference even, because sometimes you can get stuff from the plant references that do not have any religious identity. We'll take those first if they're intact. Secondly, actually that's not true. The first one we would take would be the ones that actually do call something going on or something like that. And then the second one would be the neutral ones. So the third one would be the ones that exist, but okay, it's like saying Jesus, then what do you do? And I don't like to just rip them out, but because that doesn't seem right. But by the same token, so sometimes we'll write our own, which is perfectly acceptable in braucherei, and to write new chants. So that's how they pretty much got there.
And just finally, do you like the book The Red Church?
Yeah.